Running your first Traveller game? Confused? Overwhelmed? Hungry? Hi, I'm Clark from the Weeping Stag, and I've been running TTRPGs for 15 years, and I've played and run in dozens of systems. However, most recently, I finished my first ever Traveller game. So today, I want to take what I've learned and show you my step-by-step guide on how I recommend you prep for your first Traveller game, as well as the tips and tricks I learned along the way. Come on, let's go. I assume for most of you that you've done your research and your heart is set on Traveller. But some of you might be wondering, what is this Traveller game? And is it right for me? And if you're one of those people, here's Traveller in a nutshell. Traveller is a sandbox RPG set in a semi-generic space setting called Charted Space. The basic assumption of the base game is that your players will probably be hopping from planet to planet, striking trade deals, hunting bounties, and working contracts while they pay off the mortgage on a spaceship. This is what is called the classic free trader campaign, or what I affectionately call losers in space. Think Journey to a Small Angry Planet, Firefly, or Cowboy Bebop. And because of its modular nature, and over 9 bajillion supplements, Traveller is also capable of telling stories in other sci-fi spacefaring genres, such as space opera or nerds in space. However, for the purposes of this guide, I'm going to assume you're running losers in a spaceship, and so this is going to be mostly applicable to that, but the general advice here should be widely applicable to any Traveller game, especially for a new GM. The rules of Traveller can seem overwhelming at first, especially if you're new to RPGs or coming from D&D or another class-based system. One of the most important things you can keep in mind when learning Traveller is to put yourself in a growth mindset. There are a lot of subsystems and a lot of rules for lots of different parts of the game, and it's okay to not know every single rule by your first session, right? Therefore, it's better to build up knowledge slowly, bit by bit. It's kind of like peeling a potato. Slower is better, but not too slow. Anyways, for your first session of Traveller, you're really only going to need to be able to answer 3 questions about the rules. 1, what happens if a PC shoots or stabs someone? 2, what happens if someone shoots or stabs a PC? And 3, where can they find a cool bar to get stabbed at? Since you're playing Traveller, you're going to need to shove aside that goblin's horde of colorful plastic caltrops that belong in a Home Alone movie and save your paychecks and sell your house to get 2 of these bad boys. That's right. 2d6 instead of splurging on countless regular and irregular polygons. You're finally going to be able to save up for that avocado toast you've always wanted. Skill checks themselves are as straightforward as peeling garlic. Whenever your player wants to do an action wherein the result of failure might be interesting, the GM can declare the appropriate characteristic and skill to use, the difficulty of the check, and then ask the player to roll. For those of you coming from D&D, it might seem a little odd to declare the difficulty of a check, but for Traveller, this is actually super useful because there are some rules that care about by how much you exceed the check, and so the PCs might want to collaborate and try to figure out how to get just a little bit higher. Results, likewise, are straightforward as determining if a potato is peeled. If the skill check meets or exceeds the difficulty, you exceed. Here, the player needed to succeed to meet a difficulty of 8 to remember how to operate an old Earth CD player. They rolled an electronics education roll, and their base roll was a 6, 3, and 3. Their education was a 10, so they have a +1, and their electronics is a 1, so they also get a +1 to that. This means 8. Which means they succeed. Yeah! Sometimes an action can take into the account the effect of a roll. Effect is simply the amount by which you succeeded or failed a roll. This will matter for what are called task chains, as well as some damage rolls. Task chains or linked tasks, however you want to think about them, is when players collaborate. Someone might do one skill check, and that impacts the result of another skill check. For example, you might be doing a difficulty 8 electronics check and fail it by 2. That means the effect is going to be -2. And if we look at this chart here, that's going to affect your roll based off of my effect. That will then be added to your roll or subtracted from your roll, and then you'll roll yours with that modifier, and you'll get the result that you get. Shooting someone is easy. You just make the appropriate dex plus weapons check, trying to get 8 or higher, and then roll your weapon's damage with the effect of the roll added to damage. Then you subtract armor, and that's the damage that someone's been dealt. Damage is dealt along the lines of characteristics. So if you take 6 damage, we'll first subtract it from endurance, and then we will subtract it from the other skills. Very straightforward, and as we're subtracting, you'll start to get those modifiers. This applies for NPC enemies as well, not just players. So DMs, you're going to want to track every stat block individually. It's a pain, I know, but it's how it's done. After this, here is how I would onboard my team to the rest of the rules. So if you're not jumping in session 1, I think you'll want to jump by the end of session 3. It's a good time to introduce your players to UWP codes and all of that stuff. If you haven't had combat by session 4, I highly recommend having your first combat by then. And then after this, pursue all of the starship and vehicle combat and whatever other crap you want after that. The starship and vehicle combat is not simple, and I think you really need to have a strong grounding in the rest of the rules before you tackle that. That's just my opinion, though. Traveller as a game is built to facilitate more of a sandbox style of play. What's a sandbox? Think of a large ranging map for you and your players to explore rather than a tightly scripted overarching story. It's sort of like freestyling a delicious pasta sauce. This is why we make sectors. And while these might seem like a difficult egg to crack at first, like making a delicious gnocchi, you will soon reap the rewards and be repaid tenfold because of how well you know the place you are running. Before we get to the whole sector, let's talk about planets. So in general, you want to create places that you are interested in running and that you want your players to visit. Make weird places, make memorable places. For example, I made a planet in my setting that was run by a ruthless dictator who runs the planet entirely via her nightly soap opera. After you've made the planet, then you'll make UWP codes that make sense for the planet. And you don't have to make every planet in your sector. You can create some of them and you pull some of them from some of your favorite adventures. That's what I did for my game, and that's perfectly fine. But regardless of how much you make and how much you don't make, after each planet, you're going to want to analyze the UWP code and write out what it means. This really helped me when learning how to run and learning how to read UWP codes. UWP codes, or Universal World Profile codes, are 8-digit strings describing important and general information about a planet, and can, with practice, be used to quickly determine information about an unfamiliar planet. Let's take, for example, the UWP code for Luanina, a planet I made for my campaign, D8747A8-6. The first digit, D here, represents the quality of the starport, the location where NPCs will refuel, trade, and possibly be staying for their duration on the planet. Luanina doesn't have the best one here with a D quality starport. The second digit represents planet size. A size 8 planet is similar to that of Earth, so gravity is roughly the same as well. Digit 3 is atmosphere type. Here we have a type 7 atmosphere, which indicates standard breathable atmosphere that is tainted, which means your travelers are probably going to have to get some respirators, at least for part of the planet. Digit 4 is hydrographic percentage, which is useless. Basically, are you on Pandora, or are you on Arrakis, or are you somewhere in between when it comes to water? Here or somewhere in the middle. After this comes population, and this is the easiest one to memorize. The numbers simply correspond to the number of zeros in the population. Have a 7 in your population index, such as here? That indicates the population is 10 million or higher. Notice the 7 zeros. Here, the letter A indicates the government type. Lua Nina is a charismatic dictatorship ruled over by the ruthless Jane Hernandez, who runs her government via nightly soap opera. This chart is pretty hard to memorize since it doesn't seem to work on any sliding scale other than to become more authoritarian the higher it becomes. The 7th digit here is law level. Level 8 law level indicates a lot of banned weapons and potentially a fairly strict place to visit when it comes to laws and fines and what the travelers can do legally. The last digit indicates tech level, which largely determines the sort of equipment available for purchase. A tech level of 6 indicates nuclear power and some advanced computing, probably around the 1980s. Don't worry about this too much, since tech level tends to indicate more so public availability rather than doesn't actually exist on the planet. So you could have a tech level of 0, but you could find level 14, 15 tech because someone just happens to have it there. This is a sandbox. You will want lots of content since you can never quite be sure where the players are going to head next. The worlds need not match up one-to-one when you're slotting in adventures. They just need to be feasibly able to hold that adventure. Rolling characters together in Traveller is some of the most fun I've ever had at my table. It gave me a bunch of fodder to use for the rest of my campaign and really brought the crew concept together, right? Sure, you can roll offline separately and send each other their character sheets and kind of talk about it, but I really think for this game, it's absolutely worth it to set aside one session and just to roll characters. You know, when I did this, I laughed, I cheered, I clapped. It's magical. It's sort of like serving gnocchi. It's a lot better when you're serving it for friends rather than just yourself. You might be in the mood to add something extra to the sauce, just for that little extra kick for your game. Perhaps you're considering extra modules such as High Guard or the Vehicle Handbook. My 2 cents is this. Just use the core until you're bored. Then branch out from there. Traveller books are pretty expensive, and I can't really recommend the core books as a GM tool. And by core books, I mean High Guard, the Supply Catalog, the Vehicle Handbook. If you're looking for extra content and you're a GM, instead I recommend either picking up a Journal of the Traveller's Aid Society, I really liked Volume 1, or Alien Archive 2. And this is once you're not bored. I can't speak for any of the other Alien Archives, by the way, but the reason I really like 2 is because of these guys, the Bwaps. They gave me so much for my game. I love them. They're just the best. I would die for them. I love them so much. Look, they're like the fucking Geico Gecko in space, but somehow like more litigious. Right? I had an NPC in my game that was a patron of the Travelers named Ineoi Bapawepoemoep Iskiep Bapapabas. That's a great name. Anyways, yeah, Bwap are great. Alien Archive 2, great. But what both of these supplements, JTAS and Alien Archive, have in common is that they have a variety of materials. They have vehicles, they have weapons, they have equipment, and they have lore. And they've even got maps you can steal for your sector. And the supply catalog and those other core books, they don't really have that for you to insert into your game. Anyways, yeah, get the Alien Archive 2, or whichever other one you want, but the 2's the best one, I promise. Sort of how a pro gnocchi chef knows the right pressure to roll the dough, or the right temperature at which to cook the sauce, or the perfect mixture of potato, flour, and egg. There are some things you can do and know to make your Traveller game easier and quicker. The first of these is to have a blank character sheet behind your GM screen. I cannot tell you how many times before I did this that I forgot what were the skills and abilities, what were the characteristics, where on the sheet were things. Players would oftentimes ask, like, where is my education characteristic? And it's right wherever it's circled on the character sheet. Big one, huge. Do this, get a spreadsheet. My players made a spreadsheet for my game, and that really sped up trade and all of the admin that comes with managing and owning a ship. We even automated the mortgage and the monthly payments and the crew payments, and it tracked all the cargo, and it did all the trading. There's a link in the doobly-doo, and you can copy that one, and I highly, highly recommend you use it. This is more of a GM tip than necessarily a Traveller tip, but especially for this game, players are in charge of the things that they own. So you should not be managing their ship. Just ask them to do the monthly expenses, and if they mess it up, that's on them. They need to learn how to, manage their ship. One thing I ran into, because I run shorter sessions, was sometimes that I was running a little bit too low on length. So you really want to look into kind of maybe even expanding your usual length by 30 to 45 minutes. Traveller, as I said, has a lot of interlocking subsystems, and you're really going to get a much more balanced gaming experience if you can go for that extra 30 to 45 minutes. There were oftentimes I felt like a little bit unbalanced because all we had done for 30 minutes was trade, or all we had done for 30 minutes was roll skill checks, and it just kind of got a little bit, yeah. But if you can run a little bit longer than you usually do, just a little bit, I think you'll find that problem sort of sorts itself out. And the last tip, 2 tips. Traveller is about money. The amount of money your players should be getting for jobs at the beginning should be 200,000 to 500,000 credits, depending on who's paying them and what are the stakes of the job. That might sound like a lot of money, but when it's divided among 4 crew members plus whatever NPCs are aboard, plus you've got to pay monthly expenses, it's really not that much. You will certainly not have the game snowball out of control. That I can guarantee you. And just as another tip, as I said, it's about money, and it's about this crunch, right? You want to get to the end of the month. You want to see if they can pay it. So don't just do what's in the book for fees and fines, right? Every time they land, there's a bribe to pay, there's a fee to pay, someone has to be paid something for some reason, right? Find ways to nickel and dime them. Make them kind of make those more difficult decisions about money.